Good morning, and welcome to our first Friday talk. Aiming to create a more inclusive culture for all, the College of Music Advisory Council on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion has started a series of events launching today called About Belonging. What does it mean to us, individually and collectively, to belong as a musician at UNT? In the professional performance field, in our own research and practice. Have you ever been made not to feel this belonging? What was your response? Is this then still an open question for you? These are critical questions this series will engage with throughout its component, presentations and performances. Our hope for this series is for guests to interact with each other and with the audience in this particular topic. For more information about our series, please visit our council's website, music.unt.edu/diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today, in our inaugural presentation, we will be conversing about musicians dealing with chronic illness, invisible diseases, neurodiversity, or other disabilities, a topic very close to my heart. Drawing upon personal and professional experiences, the panelists will discuss how musicians who live with physical and mental health challenges are often left to their own devices with little awareness on how to seek help. Our panelists after giving their presentation, will be hosting a Q&A. Please feel free to send your questions throughout the chat or comment section if you're watching our YouTube live stream. If you believe your question will be better explained by speaking, please in our Zoom session, please make sure to use your raise your hand function in the screen. My name is Gaby Alvarado, and I will be your moderating for you today. I'm representing also the College of Music Advisory Council on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We're honored to be accompanied by 3 of the members of our UNT community. Dr. Eric Nestler, Distinguished Teaching Professor of Saxophone, representing the UNT College of Music. Kristin Wolski, Musician Information Literacy and Outreach Librarian, representing the UNT Music Library. And Dr. Yein, Assistant Professor at the UNT Health Science Center and Texas Center for Performing Arts. We first start our presentation with Dr. Eric Nestler.
Thank you, Gaby, and welcome. Thank you all for attending this presentation about belonging, and specifically my talk that I entitle The Nightmare of Musicians' Dystonia, A New Hope for Treatment. As Gaby said, my name's Eric Nestler, and I'm Professor of Music and Saxophone at the UNT College of Music. Today, I'll present some ideas regarding dystonia and my journey attempting to overcome this debilitating movement disorder. I'd like to start with a short performance, and this, I'm going to share my screen right now, and I hope you can see this. And this is a piece by Fernand de Crook entitled The Sonata for Saxophone, and this is the 3rd movement. You know, that performance wasn't too bad, but here's an example of how I played in 2014. In the beginning of that video, you could see unwanted facial movement and a scooping formation of my tongue. Here's another example of me playing one of the basic and easiest notes on the saxophone. What you are seeing and hearing is called dystonia. More specifically, this is a clear example of embouchure dystonia. It really looks like muscular chaos, doesn't it? Dystonia is a movement disorder that affects both the nervous system and one's muscles. Embouchure dystonia specifically affects the muscles in the face, lips, tongue, and neck, everything that creates the embouchure. Yet, there is no pain. Embouchure dystonia can be so severe that it can also affect non-musical activities, like taking a drink from a glass, which is akin to forming an embouchure, or even whistling. And here's an example of me trying to whistle. The movement you just saw is not gentle. In fact, I describe it as being violent. Sometimes it even happens with no musical or physical prompts. Here's a video of me taken one morning just after waking up. And I have to caution you right now, if you might be offended seeing me without a shirt, you can avert your eyes. As far as one's performing career is concerned, dystonia is a death sentence, but it doesn't have to be as long as one seeks help, especially if it is caught early, ideally as soon as one notices strangeness in one's playing. And this is really the primary point of my discussion today. As performers, when we notice something that doesn't seem or feel quite right, seek help, first from a trusted pedagogue, but if the problem persists, consider seeking advice from medical professionals. I really think I started noticing dystonic symptoms when I was an undergraduate student, and certainly when I was a graduate student in my 20s, although I did not know what it was. I always assumed I wasn't practicing either hard enough or correctly. Eventually, I figured out a way to compensate, which kind of worked for much of my professional life. But it was always iffy, and there was always a question mark in my mind, will it work today? In 2008, my playing quickly devolved, and by September, I couldn't actually make a sound on the saxophone without biting myself in a very violent way. For the next 4 years, I tried to make it work on my own, but eventually gave up. I sought advice from my primary care physician, who led me to a neurologist, who led me to another neurologist, Dr. Joseph Yankovich at the Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, who prescribed Botox injections. Many consider this to be a method of maintaining dystonia, but it is not a cure. Botox weakens muscles, which doesn't really help when performing a musical instrument. Later, I received clinical help from Chong Bai, an acupuncture doctor specializing in both Eastern and Western styles of medicine, which helped tremendously. Here's a slide of what an example of an acupuncture looks like. Again, no shirt, close your eyes if you don't wish to see. It's kind of interesting to see the needles sticking in me. That actually helped quite a bit, and I was able to begin practicing again with success. Dr. Bai's diagnosis was the muscles on the left side of my face atrophied, while the muscles on the right side of my face compensated and were working too hard, and that led to the dystonic tremors. I also sought advice from a chiropractor and musician's health specialist, Keith Fadak in Fort Worth, as well as a specialist in movement therapy and ergonomics, Joaquin Farias in Toronto. Finally, I met Dr. Saj Survey at the UNT Health Science Center in Fort Worth. Along this arduous journey, I received valuable and important information from each professional that helped me. In working with Dr. Survey, he suggested 2 courses of action. First, releasing the muscular tension in the culprit muscles, and which he does in a clinical treatment. And second, incorporate the idea of cross-training. In this next video, you can actually see Dr. Survey work on me. And I might not play the entire video, but you'll get an idea.
The tongue exercise.
Where you stick your finger.
Oh, the actual treatment.
Yeah, the treatment.
Okay. So we're gonna treat the jaw first, and then we're gonna do the tongue. Okay.
Yep.
So I'm gonna have you open and then close. We're gonna press straight back into the pterygoids. Just hold this here. Doing okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's starting to soften right now. I'm just going to hold that pressure, let the fingers sink. Good. Okay, there we go. So it's nice and relaxed. So we're going to come on out here, and can you touch the tongue up to the roof of the mouth there? We're going to go right on the inside there, and just here, you can relax your jaw so we don't set that off. So we want to touch the floor of the mouth here. And then we want to get to the floor of the mouth, or the floor from the bottom too, so we use both fingers together. Because the base of the tongue and the floor of the mouth form kind of 2 layers, so we want to hit the external and internal layers simultaneously, so that we can stretch these out against each other and also hopefully suppress some of that.
So this is an example of the kind of treatment that Dr. Survey works on me. But you know, it might be interesting to see a picture of me without the outer layer. I'm jesting, that's not really me. But underneath, you can see the muscles that he's working on. Here, the lateral pterygoid, which, by the way, really helped my TMJ. I no longer have that. And then also he was working on this muscle, the stylohyoid, but not on the left side, on the right side. Okay. So as a way of cross-training, Dr. Survey suggested that I practice the flute in conjunction with my daily practice of the saxophone. The skills necessary to practice the flute are similar to that of the saxophone, yet not exactly the same. In effect, by practicing the flute, my performance of the saxophone is indirectly improved. One of Dr. Survey's associates at the UNT Health Science Center, Dr. Yein, who is with us today, hello, Dr. Lee, described the process to me as a way of confusing the brain. So here is an example of my flute performance that is, oh, it went away. Here we go. So, you know, that's not so bad, but here's an example of my flute playing just a few days later, and you can really see the dystonic symptoms at play. Well, that was quite telling. You could even see the tongue kind of out of control. You know, before dystonia ruled my life, I performed solo recitals in North America, Eastern and Western Europe, Africa, and Asia. I even performed a solo recital in Carnegie Hall. All the while, I noticed strangeness in my playing and difficulty doing specific performance techniques. For a variety of reasons, I waited much too long to seek professional help. As dystonia began to dominate my musical life, I found myself practicing more and more, up to 6 hours a day, but it got worse and worse. My performance skills quickly devolved over the span of a year, and for the next 4 years, I tried to figure it out without any success. Now, after working with Dr. Survey, I'm able to play recitals again. It's not exactly perfect, but it's a quantum leap better. I would also describe some demographics to you. Typically, men get dystonia more than women, and usually for men, it hits kind of later in life. For me, I was in my early 40s. You might be curious to know the principal oboe player, Alex Klein of the Chicago Symphony, has dystonia. You might be curious to know that he and I are the same age, and dystonia hit us at the same time in our lives. So today's presentation is really about belonging, and I would say just a couple of things about this. You know, two of the hardest days in my life were when I stood up in front of the woodwind faculty to say I couldn't play the saxophone anymore. And also when I stood in front of the saxophone studio and said the same thing. The woodwind faculty were incredibly supportive, and I really appreciate that. Some silver linings. Well, I had to seek other ways to be creative. And one of them is that I published several articles about music and also dystonia. Another silver lining was I learned to speak Mandarin Chinese and was able to give a few lecture recitals in Mandarin and in China. And that's something that I'm quite proud of that I might not have been able to do had this not happened to me. But I think maybe the biggest silver lining is that students see me trying to overcome adversity and never give up. So thank you for listening to my talk today. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to field them. Otherwise, Gaby, I'll put my speaker on mute.
Thank you so much for sharing I struggle with a lot of what you have been talking about today, not necessarily in the same physical conditions, but a little bit of just the struggle of what do these chronic illnesses do to your career, and how do you face them and react to them, and what can you do about helping others, whether it is as a role model or just helping them go through the same situation. If we have any questions, I'll keep them to the end. But for now, I'll pass it on to Kristin.
Okay, I think I have unmuted and made my presentation full screen. All of that to get started. And I just want to say thank you very much for this council for inviting me to speak about this, and to Gaby for inviting me. And like Gaby was just saying, there's so much of what Dr. Nestler was just saying that I can relate to. And I will try to actually bring some of what he was saying into my presentation as well. I also have been diagnosed with a different kind of movement disorder. And so I think it's really great, Dr. Nestler, that you have been capturing it and documenting it on video. When I was diagnosed with my movement disorder, it was 2003, and that was the era of the flip phone. I don't even know if you could take a video on phone back then. But I've named my presentation Chronic Adventures, and I've mostly turned this into a PowerPoint so that I could help myself keep on track And Gabby, please stop me if I go on too long. Cue the music like at the Oscars, and I will be quiet. I named it Chronic Adventures because it really is, living and managing multiple chronic illnesses really is kind of a never-ending. It's a never-ending journey. So, and I try to look at it with humor, because if not, you would kind of be down in the dumps. So, just so for some credibility, I just wanted to say, excuse me, my voice is going out all of a sudden. I wanted to just sort of give these watershed moments in my life, to say this is where I'm coming from. And it's really a confluence of different disorders and illnesses that I've been diagnosed with over time. And so starting in 1997, I was at that point about 11 or 12 years old. And all of a sudden I had sudden onset. I could tell my brain just wasn't working how it normally had. I had been a bright child. I was a successful student. And then all of a sudden, like a light switch, I remember in 7th grade, I was starting to struggle in math. And those who know me know I'm not the best at math, but just a year prior to that, I was awarded best math student in 6th grade. So, it was there, this ability to process information was there, and it just like a light switch had gone off. And so I was also at that point suddenly getting some symptoms of major depression, and then in mania. Bipolar disorder does run in our family, and so I was diagnosed incorrectly with bipolar disorder, but it made sense at that time. And it wasn't until August of 1999, I think I'm a freshman in high school at this point, that I started getting chronic infections, super high fevers, super high inflammation throughout my body, lots of pain, and then going to 2 different research hospitals in Chicago. And that's the other thing. I was really grateful to be in a city that had lots of research hospitals, just like here in Texas. There's some great healthcare. I was finally diagnosed with a very rare form of lupus called neuropsychiatric lupus. And so really these mood symptoms that I was having, these bipolar disorder symptoms, this sudden cognitive problems I was having and symptoms really were a result of my body attacking itself, attacking my brain tissue, in particular the cerebellum, and then the way that the blood was flowing throughout my brain was abnormal. And so we treated this. I was essentially dying at this point, and we treated this with chemotherapy throughout my whole high school time. And I will say that my doctors at this point really wanted me to continue on with school and tried as best as possible. And I know we, don't like to use the word normal, but as normal as possible of a high school experience that most teenagers and kids are experiencing. And so I kept going to school, and I missed a lot of school. It was just difficult with chronic infections and whatnot. And then this is, when Dr. Nestler said, I started noticing issues with my playing all the way back, he said, into his undergraduate years. In this time, I was noticing while playing cello is my instrument, this discoordination happening between my left and right hand. And that's something musicians work on all the time, right? Is coordination. But this was something different. It was significant. So that was the first thing I noticed. Something just wasn't right. And I'd try hard. I'd practice more. I just wasn't getting it. And I was preparing the Haydn Cello Concerto in C for to play with the orchestra my senior year. And also about 3 months before I was supposed to play that, I started getting shoulder tics, and my mouth would have involuntary tongue movements. My German teacher would point to me and say Kaugummi, which means chewing gum in German. And I would look at her and I'd shrug, and I said, I'm not chewing gum. And, but it looked like it, I don't blame her for that. So these weird, odd symptoms started, and then they just gave me more medicine, which was masking the symptoms. We were starting to see a problem with the dopamine in my brain. And so I go through summer, I decide I'm going to college for a cello performance. I get there, things are going great. We're at 2003 now. Where we were on trimesters at that point. And it's a very intense 10 weeks. Really great experience, but I also was not really doing very well. I was having tachycardia, so rapid heart rate, digestive problems, but academically I was doing very well. November of 2003 is when I start seeing these abnormal movements back again. And at this point, it was trembling in my legs. I would fall over. My limbs would start flailing. More of the oral facial movements that Dr. Nestler was talking about. And it got to the point where I needed to go to the emergency room, essentially. And so my family came, they picked me up, and we went to the ER. And the doctor said, "You know what this is, don't you?" And I said, "I do." And then they said, "You probably will never be able to play at the level that you want to play." And so it's difficult, and I always kind of lived in the denial phase of that. And eventually I did come to the conclusion that I'm always going to have hand tremors and things like this. But it's like Dr. Nestler was saying, there's silver linings in this, which I will talk about as we move on. And then I went on to study musicology here at the College of Music, and that led me into music librarianship. And so there's, I didn't go on the path that I thought I was heading on, but I went on a new path that has been exciting in a different kind of way. But it wasn't until March of 2010, when I was a grad student, I noticed more of this cognitive decline, that I went to the UNT counseling and testing services. And I just said, something's just really not right with my brain. I just really could tell something wasn't going well. And it kind of reminded me of these symptoms I was getting back in 1997. And that's when they referred me to a neurobehavioral psychologist working in the Denton area. And I could finally got proper diagnoses of what was happening in my brain. And it was both, devastating, but also a relief, because it gave me the ability to move on and to find ways to adapt and to continue my studies in a way where I could get help and learn in a way that worked for me. So I want to talk about how some of these symptoms impacted me as a musician. And there's this physical component where the two sides of my brain are not functioning. They're not talking to each other well. And this I learned through that neurobehavioral psychology testing. And that is a result of the lupus that I have. And then compound that with the neurochemical problems from the tardive dyskinesia, which is the result of taking medication for mood disorder. Add that with the lupus that's already impacting the brain, and you get something that looks really weird. So whenever I see doctors, I'm kind of like the zebra case, and they kind of never know what to do with me when they see me, but when things are flaring up. So because I have these multiple different kinds of issues going on. And then there's the cognitive and psychiatric. So it's this that I also get as a result of lupus, and it's the sort of memory slips, poor retrieval of accessing words, brain fog. I kind of describe this as like the blue screen of death that you get, on a Windows machine. Poor concentration. It's this made school really difficult. Racing thoughts when my mood disorder is sort of out of balance, and then just struggling to kind of keep up with the pace with all of these different things going on in my brain. So all of these different things, I think I realized this sort of a year ago, that there's sort of this cycle of grief, this trauma of one, I think there's two for me. One that goes back to when I was young, and so about 7th grade. And like Dr. Nestler was saying, I can identify symptoms now that I was starting to have as far as the cognition issues all the way back to 4th grade. And I wish I would have spoken up, because maybe we would have gotten a diagnosis sooner. But there's that cycle, and then there's the cycle of the tardive dyskinesia, the onset of that. But I find myself, going through these. I think I tend a lot to live in the denial portion of this, but I do, I have worked really hard over many years, with therapists, with talking to friends, and just lots of self-reflection. But I think inevitably I'm kind of always going through different stages of this at different times with the two different things I was just talking about. So back to about belonging. I think about this a lot. This is by Caspar David Friedrich, I believe. It's The Monk at the Sea. And it's just this isolation feeling, I think sometimes. When you break your arm, you have a cast on, someone comes up to you and says, "Oh, you broke your arm, how did you do that?" When you have a chronic illness and it's an invisible illness, people don't know what's going on with you. And sometimes I prefer that. Other times I kind of think it might be easier to progress throughout the day if I could just say, "Oh man, I'm feeling really not great today. This is why I'm having a hard time with this project or this cello etude," or something like that. So I think there's a number of challenges that, as when you have a confluence of multiple chronic illnesses, the world doesn't stop when you're not feeling well, right? And so how do you deal with that? There's just also the challenge of support, balancing professionalism with self-care. So I personally like to keep a good separation between those things. I really don't want my personal life to be impacting my professional life. However, there comes a point when they just do intersect. And that's something that I've been working on, is how can I make those two intersect in a professional way, where I'm not putting a burden on my coworkers or somebody I'm working with, but also so they're just aware that if I'm struggling to think or remember something, this is what's going on with me at this point, and I'll keep working and trying harder to find ways that work for me to be successful with these different challenges. There's, in the music field, I think proving competency is something that happens in every part of different areas of music, right? So whether you're pursuing a music education degree, performance, whether you're in ethnomusicology, music history, theory, and so forth, there's just this idea that you always have to be on. You're proving yourself through your musicianship and your technique. And I think for me, going through a 4-year degree with chronic illnesses and a movement disorder, this was felt very isolating. And finding alternative paths. So I think for me, this has been a huge challenge, is if I'm not going to pursue a degree in cello performance, what's next? Some things, another thing that kind of leads to some sort of isolated feelings, sometimes think before you speak. These are things that I've just been told throughout my life. I can kind of laugh at some of them now. Some of them come from my family. You look tired, you seem manic. My mom used to say that a lot. You seem manic. I'd just be excited about something, like maybe something positive happened, and I get the "you seem manic." Thanks a lot. This one, "you aren't going to make it through college." Somebody told me that in high school, a peer. Turns out I have 3 degrees now. You play so beautifully, but then it's like your brain glitches. Well, that person kind of got it right, but it wasn't fun to hear. You look frail. You should do X, Y, Z. So I had someone was telling me I should lift weights to help with my movement disorder, and they thought that would cure it. No, it's neurochemical. You know, there's things misfiring in my brain. So you're not feeling well, but you look so healthy. That one grinds my gears. You're really bright, but you did so poorly on such and such a thing. Why in the world aren't you continuing with a performance degree? I got that one a lot. But people don't understand what it feels like with what's going on in your brain, or these little feelings of like twitches throughout your body. And for me, it was, I was earlier in my career I was by 18, 19, 20, and I decided that this wasn't something that I could manage moving forward. And I decided to take a different path. So instead of maybe saying some of these things that you're observing about something, maybe try instead, hey, we haven't caught up in a while. How are you doing lately? What's new? How can I help with this? I noticed this about you. What can I do to help? So it's these more open-ended general questions is when I've had some of the most insightful and productive and meaningful conversations with people about my health. I wanted to focus on some solutions, and from the perspective of a student. So I've been managing different diseases as a student in multiple music degrees. And then as a faculty and a staff member at UNT. From the student perspective, I would just recommend students reach out to the ODA office. I had when I was a student, and I found them to be very helpful. Reach out to testing and counseling services. And that goes to my point here in the middle of get a proper diagnosis. In my experience, it's how can you move forward without knowing what you're dealing with? From the faculty and staff perspective, to the state of Texas or whoever is responsible for our mental health coverage plan, I've had it described to me that we used to have a Cadillac plan, and now we're kind of down to like the Honda plan. And I have had used Honda before, so I'm not making fun of that. But basically, the person who I was referred to from UNT Health Medical, from UNT Testing and Counseling Services for neurobehavioral psychology testing, she was my doctor for 10 years. I no longer can see her because I would have had to pay 3 deductibles in 1 year. She's out of network, and she's been told that she's overqualified to be in network. Training for identifying students in distress. I don't know if we have that. I've been a supervisor to students for many, like 5 years now. I don't know that I've ever taken a training like that. Maybe that's out there, but I think that could be helpful if it doesn't exist. And then just the idea of maybe re-examining some policies. So for instance, when I was a TA at the College of Music, we had to take 3 courses of our own courses. Man, that would have been helpful if I could take 2. I know there's all kinds of policies that go into these decision makings, but I think I would have been much healthier if there was some kind of flexibility like that. And then for anyone involved, tell your supervisor and friends what you need. They can't read your mind. And I just did this yesterday. I got some really bad sleep, and I knew I needed to go home and rest. I could feel my neuro system really starting to crash. And I had some very, kind and helpful colleagues who were able to help me out, and so that I could go home and get some rest. Once again, get a proper diagnosis, start find or start a peer support group. You don't have to be a hero. This is something I have challenges with. I sometimes overcompensate for times when, back in middle school or high school when I wasn't going to class and wasn't doing as well as I wanted to do. And so sometimes I overcompensate, and just keep going. I know I'm almost at time here. I started timing myself, but self-care and advocacy, all I want to say really here is you take control of your health. No one else is going to do that for you. And I recommend partnering with your doctor. And it's fun if you don't find that you're getting what you need from your healthcare provider, you can fire your doctor. Yeah, I have had doctors before prescribe me medications that interacted with other medications dangerously. I have brought my own research to my doctors where they were not aware of something, very serious, or they have missed things in my medical records before. Everyone's trying the best they can. You know, doctors are human. I'm just saying that if you're not getting what you need, you take action. And basically, I'm going to skip to this last one since I'm out of time. Surround yourself with supportive friends, family, and humor. This has been a real important one for me. This one really, and this is how I'm ending, I get this a lot. You're so strong. I could never go through what you went through. 1, yes, you can. 2, you might have to. And I really hope that you don't have to, but this is life and we get sick and we have challenges. And 3, you don't really have much of a choice. So I hope that some of these strategies that I have experienced and have implemented over the years could be helpful to somebody. And I think the more that you take in your own health into your own control and are active and proactive, you get a better sense of where you fit in to the world. And I want to just thank everybody for listening, and I'd be happy to in the future, if you want to reach out, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Feel free to email me.
Kristin, thank you so much for sharing with us your story and all that information. As a council member, I'm taking notes of a lot of the suggestions that you're bringing, especially those about re-examining policies and just about training, because I think it will be really important for us to continue advocating for the students. And like I was saying the other 2 times, if you are listening and have any questions for any of our panelists, just make sure that you drop it in the chat. If you're listening through YouTube, you can also drop it in the chat there. We have somebody monitoring our live stream. And now our next panelist is Dr. Yein.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up if you can. Great. So I'm going to share my screen. I usually lecture to really sleepy and tired medical students. And I know that, so this is a change of pace for me, obviously. And then I know we're sharing our stories today, but I obviously can't help myself. And so I created a PowerPoint. And so let me start here by saying, yes, I am a physiatrist. What's a physiatrist? Or physical medicine rehabilitation specialist. Basically, I am all of this, all of that. It's a very complicated field. But at the end of the day, I see many patients who have lost function, whether it be because of illnesses, trauma, or diseases. And so I see a lot of patients with different types of disability. So as a rehab doctor, and also as a small, soft-spoken Asian female doctor, I have tons to say about diversity, equity, inclusion. But I also understand that my experiences are mine and mine only, and I do not understand everyone else's experience related to diversity, equity, inclusion. So I think my goal today is to just add to the conversation. If I say something out of ignorance, please let me know so I can correct it. And now I'm going to share my experience and observations as a physician taking care of musicians with disabilities. I really hope what I share today will add to the continued conversation on creating a more inclusive UNT family. So there was a time that I thought I was going to make a living playing the violin. So in the 80s and the 90s, I practiced a lot, I performed a lot, and I auditioned a lot. Then I started to develop problems like tendonitis on my thumb, muscle aches around my shoulder blades, numbness and tingling in my fingers. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I just played through it, just like actually probably all of you. As I later found out, I clearly wasn't the only one doing this. And so it turns out my friends I met through various ensembles and festivals has similar issues. This picture right here is 1999, some random hotel in Rochester, New York, where some of us were passed out from exhaustion, basically, from that day's marathon rehearsal. And some of us who were alive were giving each other massages. At that time, we all didn't think much of this. If anyone would ask, we would be thinking like, wasn't this not normal, you know? And clearly now I'm thinking, no kidding, no one should be playing with this much pain. But, you know, I was young, teenager, right? So this is just one example of musician culture. So when it comes to injury, disease, and disability, this is what I see day in and day out. As a physician observer, musicians are enormously unhealthy. They ignore this and push ahead every day, day in and day out. So typically musicians have a ton of stress. They don't exercise. They eat horribly. Then they tackle every day with this unrelenting grit. You think some discomfort or pain while playing is completely normal, or worse, you aren't even aware of it. And I heard this from the two of the speakers before me. So, and on top of that, you have this attitude of no pain and no gain. Like, if you can't achieve something, okay, I'm going to practice more, right? Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And so, so many amongst you are likely suffering from something at this time. Musculoskeletal injury, yeah, probably. And so according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, 50 to 76% of professional musicians have reported sustaining musculoskeletal injuries. This famous study by Ackerman and her team have shown that vast majority of musicians, 84.4%, had at some time in their career experienced pain or injuries that had interfered with their normal playing or participating in rehearsals and performances. 84%, that boggles my mind, even though I do this for a living every day. What about mental health? So I don't know why this is young children with elderly family members. This is wrong. I think the transfer over of this picture just didn't transfer at all. So this 50% percentage rate is actually from Music Industry Research Association here, the MIRA. They performed a survey in 2018, and 50% of musicians reported to be suffering from depression. And then the 12%, they reported having suicidal ideations. And so think about this number, 50%, that's just so much higher, significantly higher numbers compared to the general American public. Other than musculoskeletal disorders and mental health issues, I take care of many musicians with varying degrees of disability. For some, the length of injury and illness is not long enough to cause long-term disability. And for some, they're born with their disabilities. Maybe they have a genetic disorder, or maybe they had an injury. Look at this MRI on the left. If you're not sure, yes, this is an MRI of the brain. There is even arrows pointing towards abnormal areas of the brain. And it's pretty obvious this is not a normal brain MRI, right? This actually is an image of a cerebral palsy patient. I just Googled it, okay? If you meet this patient, likely you will see the neurological symptoms caused by the brain injury pretty clearly. But for many, they acquire disability. But for many of they have acquired disability or they're born with it, but you cannot really see this symptom very clearly. And so some I see in my office, they develop disability due to playing-related injuries. For something like hand and wrist pain due to overuse-related disability, something I see really common. Basically, each patient comes with different types of symptoms, different types of life story, unique history, and sometimes this unique history for each patient is closely tied to their disability. When we think of disability, we sometimes focus on very obvious physical, cognitive, mental health, or learning disabilities. Many patients that I take care of have diagnoses like spinal cord injury or brain injury, cerebral palsy, ALS. These pathologies exhibit clear impairments. But not all disabilities are visible to you. Most musicians I see in my office share their stories of difficulties with basic functional activities like walking to the pharmacy or walking to your car every morning, washing your hair, or making dinner. But they still sit through that difficult rehearsal that go on for hours. They still sit in that classroom. They still teach hours on end with their students. Some struggle to make deadlines. For some, it is difficult to sit through a meeting. Some people have a hard time financially because they may not be able to take on as many gigs as others. Some view their disability as a struggle. Others own it, like their identity is linked to it. Like I said, many patients have different history and unique personal experiences. So let's add other overlapping identities and experiences, such as race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, faith, spirituality, so on and so forth, right? Okay, on top of that, let's add the incredible overachieving nature of musicians, competitiveness of the field, nonstop feedback and criticisms that come to you. Then add another layer of general culture of pushing through pain and suffering, not speaking up about injuries, illnesses, or disability. So, and not to mention general lack of infrastructure and support system systemically for everyone to navigate the stressful world of music, regardless of their diagnosis. So with this said, my thought is, well, we don't really have quite an inclusive community yet, right? So if you're a faculty, and I guess if you're in education, wrestling with these ideas of creating more inclusive educational environment, I would say really consider this different phases of disability too. And if you're a student pursuing music, you would likely be mentoring and teaching in some shape or form. So please join in the conversation on how to create a more inclusive environment because, you know, we don't really have answers yet and we don't have real good outline yet on how to create that, right? So this is my final thought. We're all unique, just like each snowflake is unique. Everyone wants a chance to feel valued and respected for who they are and what they bring to the table. I think our differences should be embraced as strengths, especially for those of you in the arts business of creating and reflecting human life and suffering through music. Inclusion and diversity promote well-being for everyone in the community, and diversity inspires creativity and innovation. And science has shown us this already extensively. It is difficult to understand the clear path to more inclusive community, but having difficult conversations with love is a great way to start. So I left some time at the end, I think, for those of you who have a lot of questions. And I am extremely reachable, as you can see. I'm on all social media platforms. And so you can reach out to me anytime you want. And I'll say thank you very much for your attention. Let me unshare.
Thank you so much for all of that. And she is definitely very reachable. I'll tell you for experience. She's my only doctor that I can actually reach all the time. I'll read, there's one question in the chat right now from Dean Richmond, and he is asking, are the depression data from pre-COVID pandemic and more recent? The ones that you were discussing today.
Yeah, it's pre-pandemic, and I actually am trying to get a research survey project approved so that I can get more data through the pandemic. So hopefully in a year or so, I can tell you more.
Awesome. I have prepared a couple questions just like based on many of the things that you guys discussed today. And as I continue to get more questions, I'll read out loud. So far, everyone seems to be very grateful for what you guys have been sharing today. And some of this was already discussed in some of your presentations, but if you could use this time to be maybe more specific, what are kind of the recommendations for students that are already presenting symptoms, whether this is like just stress, anxiety, pain? Like, what do you recommend for the students that are currently already presenting symptoms that they see themselves, like with that kind of like hand coordination, or not coordination, I would say, because like that will be your first problem, or like in also on, like if you already are in that moment, what would you be recommending to a student right now? And you can go in any order.
Should I go? Okay. All right, I'll go first. I think that there are various ways to approach this. So everybody's initial presenting symptom for various different types of diseases, illnesses, and pathologies can come on differently. So it could be a hand pain, it could be a movement problem, it could be anxiety, it could be stress. And therefore, it is really important for an organization to have an organized infrastructure to provide support in advice, counseling, support group, as well as what we call a seamless transition to sort of healthcare that is sort of tiered in a way. Now, in a perfect world, in my brain, what I would love to have is like a phone line or like a online sign up or like a chat system where somebody could just kind of chit chat with someone who's on call. And in fact, when I was a medical student back in New Jersey, covered in snow right now, we used to have that for our medical students. So actually student champions would volunteer and create a support network. And in fact, here at Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine, my medical students have that as well. And they call it a mind group. And they regularly meet as a group, and they regularly reach out social media, through personal sort of one-on-one connection. They regularly meet, especially through the pandemic. And they have a peer support network. And then peer support network is linked to the faculty support network, which is linked to student health network. And so therefore, there's this tier system, and that is easily reachable and is not too burdensome for the healthcare providers. But at the same time, you are able to continue on some kind of a conversation. And here at Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine, also we actually have a separate sort of a private counseling system that is 24 hours open for our students as well, where you dial a number, and each student is actually matched up with an advisor, and they can text me, they can email me, they can call me if they don't have the number or whatever, and I will provide that number, and they can call and reach out anytime. So these are some of the systems that we've played in. I always say medical school and music school is really similar in terms of motivation of the students, the drive, the stress level, the constant criticism, constant testing. It's just very similar. And so for us, we've dealt with lots of issues holistically, head to toe, mind, body, spirit, health issues overall for years now because of amount of stress and work. And these are some of the solutions we've implemented already. I think it's helping, at least for us. We at Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine, we have numbers to prove it actually. So that would be my humble suggestion.
Thank you very much. Dr. Nestler, would you like to take some time for suggestions?
Thank you, Gabby. You know, at UNT, my primary function is to teach studio. And so I have somewhere around 20 students that I see every week. And because of my experiences, one of the things that I'm now constantly looking for in students is either a physical manifestation of a problem, or sometimes it's, I'm not sure the correct word, mental or psychological. I'm not a medical person and I don't want to use the wrong terminology, but sometimes students you can just tell that they might be not quite, again, I don't want to, I'm going to say the word right, but I don't want to offend anybody, but I don't have the vocabulary, the correct vocabulary probably to say, but you can get a feel for how a student is feeling that particular day. And I will often ask a student, how are you? And, you know, at UNT, we have services available to deal with physical issues like I've had to deal with, or mental, psychological issues. And I always tell a student, never feel ashamed about what's going on. There's no stigma, none. We have the services at the UNT College of Music and the UNT Health Science Center to seek help. And so when I see students who are exhibiting a physical issue, just like Dr. Lee had mentioned, don't play through the pain. You know, stop right away and go over to Chestnut and make an appointment to see Dr. Lee or Dr. Survey. And they if someone is feeling maybe depressed, again, I might be using the wrong terminology, I don't mean to, but if the stress of being a music student is burdensome, I suggest talking to somebody, a professional that could provide advice. I'm always happy to listen, but I also tell the students I'm not a professional in that field, and I might not be able to give an appropriate diagnosis, and I don't want to maybe make it worse, but I can say you should go see a certain person in our health system here at the University of North Texas. I also tell the students that we're so lucky here in Denton because we have this facility and these people, Dr. Survey, Dr. Lee, and their colleagues that can help us as musicians and as people cope with the highly stressful world we choose to live in, which is music.
Thank you. That is very supportive. I feel like in my own career, I found too many teachers who just were like either dismissive or told me I just wasn't working hard enough. So I am glad to see that there's somebody that I actually remember this one phrase being like, I have degrees in music performance. I have, and they just kind of dismissed whatever I was saying. And that was the complete conversation about me having to deal with all of these health issues. So I'm glad that you as a faculty are offering your students this kind of support, even if it's just recommending them to go to the specific office. That is great. Kristin, I'll give you a chance to give some suggestions, and then we'll have more questions.
Yeah, I would like to respond both to Dr. Lee and Dr. Nestler's comments. I liked this idea of this holistic support network that Dr. Lee was describing, because as someone who has, as a student sought help, or even just now, I frequently run into, as far as managing my healthcare, dead ends. So you go somewhere where someone says, "Oh, I think this department will help you," or this department, or this doctor, and you go there and you've heard how they can help you or not, and then you're left with, now what? And so there's this, if there was some kind of structure in place where, like, I like this idea of maybe an advisor or someone who a student can connect with, and they can say, did you get what you needed from this department, or are you back at square one again? So I've experienced it a lot myself. I've experienced that with other students a lot. And as Dr. Nestler was saying, I work with students frequently, and multiple students throughout my career as a supervisor have either come to me, or I think it's probably because I have experienced multiple types of different symptoms before. It's kind of easy to identify when maybe a student is in distress. And like Dr. Nestler was saying, I'm not a doctor, of course, but I also can't help but recognize some of these things. And so if we could go back to this idea that I mentioned earlier of how do we identify students with distress, and then what are the right things to say? What are the helpful things to say to then help the student get the help that they need? It's using the right language. I don't feel confident in that, in knowing the right language of what to say. And I had even brought that up in some of my slides of things, that people have said to me before. I also find that being on the other end, being on the supervisor end, how do I get this person the help they need, and say it in the correct manner?
Thank you. Actually, most of the questions coming up are a little bit continuing to what you guys have just said. So the first one says, as many illnesses are hidden or invisible and largely unknown among their peers, what are the ways you would want to see your educational, performing, or professional spaces publicly embrace or change to set a better environment or culture? We can start with Dr. Lee again, so then we always have the same order. It makes it easier.
Thanks for telling me. Okay, yeah, so I'm gonna tie it back to kind of the question that Kristin has brought up as well. So yeah, I see some of the patients in my office, and I guess majority of the injuries momentarily are not that visible. Majority of it, but when they go back out into the world, and the world doesn't stop, right? That's what Kristin said earlier. And try to navigate that world is not that easy, especially within school. And so how do I navigate rehearsals and commitments, teaching obligations, my work obligations. How do I apply for, sort of the accommodations that I need for, maybe do I need a lengthened time for maybe certain type of examinations, because maybe you can't sit there for 30 minutes, no more than 30 minutes. Or maybe right now, because I'm going through a rehabilitation plan, I can play 15 minutes at a time, but maybe not 30 minutes at a time. These are some of the things that are individualized and different for everyone. Like I was saying earlier, right? Everybody's journey through their injuries, illnesses, disabilities is very different. And so this would be wise if there would, ideal world, okay, if we have all the resources in the world, we would have a place where somebody is there to coordinate all of this, right? So a student, I can refer the patients that I've seen who are, if they're UNT students, and if I think that they need accommodation, that there could be some kind of a relationship, or I don't have to do that. Maybe the students are aware of these resources well enough in the beginning of the school that they can assess this easier. Quite frankly, I don't know any institution that does this really, really well. And that's honest truth. And that is because it's very difficult and it takes a lot of resources and time. And it also requires an individual who understands the like I was saying, the phases of disability really well, because everybody's so different. And also in the music world, we have a lot of different teaching authorities with different types of philosophy in teaching. And therefore, there's got to be this teamwork of conversation and maybe a little bit of a negotiation. And I think an individual student sometimes cannot do that alone. And when your disability is so not visible, it is even harder because you look normal, right? And so, and that actually happens, by the way, with my patients who have severe disabilities. I don't want to use the severe because that's not usually welcomed in the language, but I'm using it so that I can communicate with a little bit better. People with brain injuries from traumatic injuries who have significant cognitive issues, they sometimes look very normal. And again, normal, which we try not to use, but I'm using the word just to clarify. We usually don't like to use the word severe or normal in general in the world of disability. But anyway, with that said, so this happens with all kinds. It happens all the time. So I think in the ideal world, if you want to look at and take care of people who are struggling with these issues that we've talked about in the last, I don't know, for a while now, I think probably better to institutionally organize that in the ideal world. I understand that this is very difficult. I hope that was helpful.
Anyone else has anything else to add to this?
Gabby, I might like to offer something. Again, thinking about myself, which maybe that's selfish, but that's the only point of reference I have, really. And projecting myself back in time to when I was a student, I heard myths about famous musicians who could no longer play anymore. And I didn't really know why, and I was never comfortable asking why maybe someone wasn't playing anymore, but it was still kind of mythology. I didn't know exactly what was going on. I knew I kind of knew what tendonitis was because I had some friends who had difficulty with fingering or playing their instrument. But I had certainly no idea what dystonia was. But now that I think about it, maybe so-and-so actually had that, and that's why they were not playing anymore. So I guess my point is awareness, I think, is a really important issue, that musicians have an awareness that something could go wrong that's not really of a musical nature. And if you know that these things are possible, if you're practicing incorrectly, or maybe not even incorrectly, maybe it's just the way our brain is wired. But awareness, I think, is kind of a key aspect that I wish students had, a greater awareness of the possible health issues. And one of my dear friends is Dr. Chris Chesky, and he would lecture a long time on this topic. I think maybe he even offered a class for the College of Music undergraduates that would be very useful. And I think he's done this in the past. But again, the issue is one of awareness.
Yes, I agree. Awareness. I think also using language, I think will be the right language will help. Kristin, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, just a few comments. To be honest, I kind of forgot the question at this point, but just a few comments about awareness. I saw Raymond said, what can we do? I think, yeah, integrating these conversations into studio teaching, into for music educators, teaching maybe middle school, grade school, high school orchestras, starting to get the conversation going about, hey, if you start to feel pain anywhere, I've had tendonitis too. If you start this, this pain, don't play through. I know so many people who played through tendonitis. But it's that idea of, back to what Dr. Lee was saying, this culture of like, you just got to struggle and get through it and keep going. And it's this very unhealthy environment. And I've just experienced that growing up more when I was younger. But one thing I wanted to mention was, for me, as I was working through how to continue playing with my movement disorder, it very much felt like an all or nothing kind of thing. And that's, once again, goes back to, I think, mentalities within music and within music degrees. Man, I wish there would have been some kind of option of like, hey, you can still play. We got these groups of quartets together. I love playing small ensemble. We got quartets together. Maybe they're not out in competing. Maybe it's almost like an intramural kind of like for fun type playing environment. That would have been great. If anyone wants to play in a quartet with me now, let me know. Just that way, it's like you're still involved in playing, but you don't necessarily have to feel like you're on all the time. It's kind of like I said too, I no longer feel comfortable gigging because sometimes I do have these really sudden kind of brain fog things that just happen, and they happen in moments of high stress. And so, but I still would like to play with people, and I still would like to perform, but maybe in less stressful environments. So if maybe we could think of alternative venues for performance in more relaxed ways.
Yeah, that's definitely a great idea. Trying to take away a little bit of like the competitive side of music and more of holistic approach. There's a question in the chat for I will say it's for everyone. What would you recommend for students who are suffering from an injury or a disability that are also severely financially restricted? I don't know who wants to go on first for this one. I think it's a tricky one.
Am I going first again? What a great question. So I will give you a long-winded answer that is probably not going to be satisfactory to you, unfortunately. So when Dr. Survey started the program at UNT School of Music for performing arts medicine, especially for the school and college of music, he envisioned a program that is not very different from collegiate programs all around the country for athletic programs. If you look at all around the country with any sort of athletic programs in college level, you will see a plethora of resources for them and for their health. Some colleges, high-level performing colleges and universities, will have nutritionists, sports psychologists, they'll have athletic trainers, they'll have sports medicine doctors and sports medicine doctors who are in training. They'll have orthopedic doctors, they'll have physical therapists, occupational therapists. They have a gym dedicated for them. They have, everything's rolled out for them. And why is that? In some ways, sports is very lucrative, right? There's financial motivation behind this. I'm so sad to say that, but there is. So when we created, when Dr. Sarbayan, in conjunction and partnership with Dr. Chesky, created the program, we who take care of musicians, we consider you athletes of small muscles. And there's no doubt about that in our minds. However, in terms of amount of capital that we have to build a program similar to a athletic programs all around this country is not that easy. I have dreams to do that. This is my 4th year into the program here working with Dr. Survey, and we're just starting. And I think the only way to really go about it is really just awareness and raising awareness, not just amongst the musicians, but amongst the public, and the value of musicians and value of music education and value of arts to the world, right? And so therefore we can raise the money to provide the services back to you. Now, right now, what can you do? I would have to say that you do have to pay some money to come and see us. It's not free, the services aren't. But I think that most of the times it is not cheap, but it is not unbearable in terms of financial burden. And so, and in some ways, if in the near future, I do have dreams to raise some funds so that, we have creative ideas to redirect some of the money that we get and from HSC, also from College of Music, and try and see if we could supplement that even further so that we can reduce the financial burden for you. So I would say if you have issues, still come and see us. We will work that out with you. At this time, I would like to say that we do have plans to make financial situations easier for you in the future.
Thank you. Anyone else has anything to add? We're almost close to the end, so I'm trying to go through as many questions as I can. Another comment, which I think you cover up a little bit, Dr. Lee, was about that your data that you show about depression was actually eye-opening, and of course healthcare availability being the factor. And I think, you did mention a little bit, but I think especially in my experience, even having insurance, the health insurance most of the time doesn't cover a lot of what you need. And this could be, the more complicated your situation is health-wise, it becomes even worse. I would say if we are able to create more resources that are available for the students coming from the college, that will be a good step forward somehow. Just try and see if I missed anyone's questions. The college has quite a number of students who are currently or will be becoming music teachers within the music education or as a performance degree. What do we do to make sure the students understand these challenges and how to direct the students to the correct resources? Anyone could add if you have anything for this. I think I don't know, like I would even say, like as somebody who has struggled with all of these diseases, like I already send, even when I was a TF, I was sending my students to see you or see the doctors, or just even visit the health center to get help. And I think that is something that you can, if I could do it as a teaching fellow, anyone else could also be adding to.
Can I do a little plug for what I'm planning for?
Sure.
I'm actually trying to develop a program for actually music teachers. Take a course in more like specifically in health. And so I know that Dr. Chesky has a great course over there, but this would be more or a deep dive into maybe like a micro-credentialing course. So anybody, elementary school, especially like middle school teachers, who are, those sixth graders who are starting up, right? Can you imagine if all of the sixth grade band teachers and orchestra teachers are aware of all these sort of common health problems in musicians? Oh my gosh, that would change the landscape. I might lose my job. So anyway, so I'm gonna stop.
Yeah, I was just gonna also recommend that maybe this becomes a core course. So what Dr. Chesky is doing, if that could be a core course really for everybody, because whether you're teaching in the private lesson studio or through in the classroom, I think this information would be great to spread from a very early age. And then back to the idea of funding and how access to healthcare can be very difficult when you don't have the funds to do it. Maybe there's an opportunity through alumni funding to help with some kind of a medical or health fund. I know there's scholarship funds out there, but maybe there's some that could be more directed to students who are having difficulty address some of the medical and health problems that are related to their musicianship.
Yeah, I agree, Dr. Lee. Maybe we can create some sort of like gala or fundraising specifically for health issues and trying to get resources for this matter. Well, we are almost at the end of our session, and I am so grateful that you guys make time in your very, very busy schedules to be here today at the lounge of our first Friday talks for About Belongings. If anyone has any content suggestions that would like to send us, or just suggestions in general for our advisory council for disability, equity, and inclusion, our email is music.diversity@unt.edu. Everyone here is very reachable, as they were saying. If you have more questions, you can email us as a council and we can reach out to the panelists, or you can reach out to them directly. Once again, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Gabby, for organizing this panel.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you, everyone.